Where the Mountain Meets the Moon. This week we are reading a fairy tale. This fairy tale is an excerpt or a part of a longer story. Okay, so this fairy tale begins with a summary of events leading up to where the excerpt begins. All right, we're going to read this now. In this tale set in long ago China, the young Menli seeks the old man of the moon. This mysterious person has the power to read from the book of fortune, which tells each person's destiny. Because he can answer any question, the fortunes of her poor family because he can answer any question, Minley hopes that he will be able to tell her how to change the fortunes of her poor family. As she sets out to find him, Minley meets a series of characters who provide clues to guide her. One character, a dragon who long ago escaped from the terrible ruler Magistrate Tiger, decides to join Minley. Together they travel to the city of Bright Moonlight, where they try to figure out a puzzling clue. Minley must find the guardian of the city and ask for a borrowed line to bring to the old man of the moon. Though Minley guesses that the guardian must be the king of the city, what could the borrowed line be? She must find out. While the dragon hides outside the city gates, Minley sneaks into the king's palace in the inner city. When she finds the king, she asks him for the borrowed line. Hearing this odd request reminds the king of a certain page that was said to have been borrowed from the Book of Fortune. The king reveals that his ancestor, Magistrate Tiger, had overtaken the city long ago, and that it was the magistrate who had angrily ripped the page from the book. So this summary explains that this fairy tale is set in China long ago. The main character, Minley, is seeking to help to change the fortune of her family. This means to make their life better, all right, because they are poor. And the summary introduces the other characters and it explains the borrowed line, what the borrowed line is, and this will be a big part of the story. He'd pour a page out of the Book of Fortune, Minley said. Yes, the king said, but he himself was never able to read it, so it remained useless to him, just as the old man of the moon had said it would be. Come, the king said, as he walked out of the pavilion onto the bridge under the moon. As Minley followed, he reached inside the breast of his shirt, slowly took out a gold-threaded pouch and said, This is the ripped page. It has been passed down from generation to generation, studied by the kings of the city of bright moonlight. None of us has ever understood what the old man of the moon meant when he said it was borrowed. Minley watched, fascinated, as the king took from the gold pouch a delicate folded piece of paper. Paler than even the white jade tofu she had eaten for dinner, the paper seemed to have a light of its own, dimming the gold threads of the pouch that held it. It was my great-grandfather, the king said, unfolding the paper, who realized that the words on it can only be seen in the bright moonlight. He renamed the city of bright moonlight, as a reminder for the kings that followed him. Minley looked at the paper as if in a daze. In the moonlight the page glowed. A single line of faint words, as if written with shadows, was scrawled upon the page in a language Minley had never seen. So I think this paper, which the old man of the moon said he borrowed, the king said. This written line torn from the book of fortune is the borrowed line you seek. Okay, so what do you think? What do you think this borrowed line is? All right, it's kind of hard to tell now. All right, let's see. Of course, Minley said, and excitement bubbled inside of her. It must be. But her excitement popped as she looked at the carefully preserved page and remembered how the king had it on his person, carefully and preciously kept in the pouch around his neck. It seemed impossible that he would give her such a cherished treasure. It was only after much study that my great-great-grandfather was able to decipher the words, the king said. And this is when he realized that the words changed according to the situation at the time. From then on, whenever a king of the city of bright moonlight had a problem, he consults the paper. And it tells you what to do? Minley asked. Yes, the king gave a wry smile. Though not the way you think. Sometimes a line on the page is more mysterious than you think. Then the problem. And with that, the king looked down at the line. As he read, a startled expression came across his face. What does it say? Minley asked. It says, the king said slowly, you only lose what you cling to. The king's words seemed to hang in the air. All was silent except for the soft rustling of the page in the gentle breeze. Minley, unable to speak, watched it flutter as if it were waving at her. So it seems your request, the king said, deserves consideration. The line tells me as much. Let me think. Minley looked at the king, quiet but puzzled. Okay, so the author uses very descriptive words here to add meaning. Minley's excitement over the torn page was like a bubble that was growing bigger, all right, but this bubble of excitement popped, leading to disappointment when Minley realized that the king was very protective of this torn page. And what is this borrowed line? So why does the king think that this is the borrowed line? What is he going to do with it? We know that he says the old man of the moon had said that the ripped page was borrowed. The king says this written line torn from the book of fortune is the borrowed line you seek. And then later he says, it seems your request deserves consideration. So this makes us think that the king will probably give this torn page to Minley. The king has been clinging to this page because he always carries it with him. All right, we know that it has been passed down from generation to generation and relied upon for answers to problems. So if Minley gets it, this will be a very big deal. For generations, my family has prized this paper. We have honored it for its spiritual power and authority. It has been passed on and studied and cherished and revered. It has been valued above gold or jade, the king said slowly. But what is it really? Minley shook her head, unsure if she should respond. It is actually, the king said, simply proof of my ancestor's rudeness, his unprincipled anger and ruthless greed. Yet we've disregarded that. Instead, we guard and protect this written line so dearly that the rulers of the city of bright moonlight carry it at all times, not daring to let it out of their possession. The moon seemed to tremble as ripples spread over its reflection caught in the water. The king continued again, speaking more to himself than to Minley. We have clung to it, are always afraid of losing it, the king said. But if I choose to release it, there is no loss. Minley felt her breath freeze in her chest. She knew the king's mind was in a delicate balance. If he refused to give her the line now, she knew she would never get it. And perhaps it was never meant for us to cling to. No matter whom the paper originally belonged to, this is a page from the Book of Fortune, a book that no one owns, the king said. So perhaps it is time for the paper to return to the book. A wind skimmed the water, and Minley could see her anxious face as pale and white as the moon reflected into it. You only lose what you cling to, the king repeated to himself. He glanced again at the paper and looked at Minley. A serene expression settled on his face, and then he quietly smiled and said, so by choosing to give you the line, I do not lose it. And with those words, he placed the paper in Minley's trembling hands. Okay, so why does the king give this page to Minley? The king realizes that his family was not meant to cling to the page, and the page should return to the Book of Fortune. All right, so this is why he decides to give it to her. And the king reasons that you only lose what you cling to. So if he chooses to release the paper and not cling to it, he can give it to Minley without actually losing it. Outside the city, Dragon waited. Even after Minley had disappeared, the dragon still watched from the trees. He had felt odd when she had passed the old stone lions and the door had closed behind her. He realized that he had never had a friend before, and what a nice feeling it was to have one. And perhaps that was why the second night, when the sky darkened and the moon rose, Dragon crept out from the shadows of the trees and approached the closed, sleeping city. While he wouldn't admit it, Dragon thought just standing by the walled city might make him feel just a bit less lonely. The silver moon cast a frosted glow upon the rough stone wall and guardian lion statues. Dragon stared at them as he approached the gate. Their stocky, heavily built bodies seemed to weigh down the stone platforms they sat upon, and the darkness of the night made their stiff, curly manes look like rows of carved blossoms. One lion held a round ball underneath his forearm. The other held down a lion cub that seemed to be grinning at him. In fact, all the lions seemed to be grinning at him as if he were a secret joke they were watching. Am I so funny? Dragon asked them as he passed. Yes, burst out the small lion cub, wriggling free of his mother's paw. You're very funny. As Dragon jumped back in surprise, the lion cub laughed out loud, obviously highly amused at the dragon's shock. But with his laugh, both adult lions shook themselves from their platforms. Chow Mao, the mother lion scolded. Don't laugh at the lost dragon. Besides, you know the rules, no moving in the presence of others. But it's a dragon, the cub said, not a people. He doesn't count for the rules, does he? Besides, he is funny. Big dragon trying to tiptoe like a mouse. Chow Mao, the deep male voice of the other lion boomed in the air. The cub gave a half-hearted look of shame and was immediately quiet and still. By this time, Dragon had found his voice. You're alive, then, he said. Of course we are, the male lion said, scrutinizing the dragon with interested eyes. Everything's alive. The ground you're walking on, the bark of those trees. We're always alive, even before we were lions, and we're just raw stone. However, carving us did give us a bit more personality. You're a fairly young dragon, aren't you? The female lion said kindly. You seem only 100 or 150 years old. Don't worry. You'll learn soon enough. 100, the lion cub said. I'm much older than you. I'm 868. And you still have not attained wisdom, the father lion told him. Don't tease the young one. All right, so we know that, of course, fairy tales have made up settings and situations that could never happen in real life. This setting is outside of a palace in the city of Bright Moonlight, and the palace gate is guarded by stone lions that can speak. The main character is a dragon. The stone lions are alive and they talk to the dragon, and the lion cub explains that he is over 800 years old. So all of these are only features that would be found in fairy tales. Well, what are you doing then? Well, what are you doing here? The cub asked, not unkindly. Dragons don't usually come down to earth much. Are you lost? Though unusual, the lions weren't unfriendly, so Dragon settled down and told them the whole story, being born, living in the forest, meeting Minley, and now their travels to find the borrowed lion and the old man of the moon. The lions didn't interrupt once, though the cub did snicker from time to time. You belong to Magistrate Tiger, the cub said when Dragon had finished. That means you're the terrible dragon. You're the one who destroyed the magistrate's palace. What a lot of trouble you caused. Dragon looked at the older lions questioningly. About 100 years ago, the female lion said, the magistrate fled his home village. A dragon had destroyed his palace and his people had cast him out, saying he was bad luck. He came here intending to make his home with his son and to live off his son's wealth and power as the king of the city of Bright Moonlight. There were bad times here for the city, as the magistrate and the officials he brought with him were corrupt and greedy. We were very concerned. You? The dragon asked. Why would it concern you? Why would it concern us? It is completely our concern, the male lion said. We are the guardians of the city. It's our responsibility to watch and keep the city turning. To see it begin to crack alarmed us to no end. And the lion held out the round ball he held in his hand and showed the dragon an old, deep fracture that was slowly being filled with the dust of the earth. What did you do? Dragon asked. String of Destiny. We were afraid the city would break. As the times became more turbulent with secret meetings and violent outbursts, we watched the crack in our world widen. It was only a matter of time, we thought, before it would tear into two. One night, as we despaired, we saw a figure walking in the moonlight. Bent and old, he glowed like a lit lantern. When we saw he was carrying a large book and a small sack, we knew instantly it was the old man of the moon and called him over. Please help us, we begged him. We need to keep the city together. The old man of the moon looked at us, our outstretched cracking globe, and our pleading faces. Without a word, he sat down before us and opened his book, leafing through the pages and stroking his beard. After several minutes of consulting his book, he opened his sack and handed us a red thread. You are to hold this until it is needed, the old man told us, and then slapped his book shut and walked away, ignoring our words of thanks. We knew the old man of the moon had given us a string of destiny, one of the very strings he used to bind people together. It was a marvelous gift. While he left us no instructions, we guessed that we were to use it to tie it around the city if it looked as if it were to split. After that, night after night, we watched our sphere, ready to use the string at the first signs of breakage. Unsure of its power or abilities, we dared not to use it for anything but the direst of circumstances. But the crack did not grow. Unexpectedly, the king renounced his father. He exiled him and his officials from the city, and harmony returned. Slowly, the fracture has filled with the powder of earth and stone, and I have held the string unused." And as the male lion finished, he lifted his paw to reveal a flattened line of red thread. "The borrowed line," Dragon said. "That's it. Minley said she needed to get the borrowed line from the guardian of the city. You're the guardian, and that's the borrowed line we need." "I suppose it is," the lion said, looking at the string. "So perhaps I have been holding it all this time so I could give it to you." And the lion dropped the string into the dragon's outstretched hand. So why does the dragon think that this is the borrowed line? He knows that Minley needs to get it from the guardian of the city, and the male lion had told the dragon that they were the guardians of the city and that they were given a thread by the old man of the moon, and he told them to hold on to it. So dragon thinks that this means it was borrowed from the old man of the moon, and it must be borrowed. It must be the borrowed line that Minley seeks. The next morning, Minley woke up alone under a heavy, rich blanket. Even though she was on the floor of the garden pagoda, she had slept comfortably, and as she sat up, she realized this was probably due to the silk pillows she had been lying on. The soft sunlight cast leaf shadows across her face, and the wind made gentle ripples in the moss-colored lake in front of her. The imperial garden was just as beautiful in the day as it was by night. On one side of her lay a small table with a small pot of tea, a bowl of rice porridge, and tea-stained eggs. "Breakfast," Minley thought to herself. But before she reached for it, she saw that a yellow brocade traveling bag lay on the other side of her. Inside the bag, Minley found her humble blanket, rabbit rice bowl with needle and bamboo piece, chopsticks, a generous supply of cakes, and her hollow gourd full of fresh water. On the very top lay the gold-threaded pouch that held the ripped page of fortune. Minley took the pouch and held it with 2 hands. "Well, I have the borrowed line," Minley thought. "At least I hope it is." So after a quick breakfast, Minley quietly left the pavilion. Part of her was tempted to explore the mosaic walkways through the jewel-colored leaves, but she knew being discovered by one of the king's counselors would be disastrous. Also, she knew Dragon was patiently waiting outside the city. So using the king's secret door, Minley carefully left the garden and walls of the inner city. And when she was out of the garden, Minley realized it was very early morning. The outer city was still sleeping, strands were bare, and the umbrellas were closed. Quickly, Minley scurried to the gate. With great effort, she was able to get through. She had to use a metal pole she'd found on the ground to lift the lock and lever one of the doors open. Even then, she was only able to get it open a crack and had to squeeze. As she fell through the gate, gasping for air, she was shocked to see Dragon lying in front of the stone lion sleeping. It took a couple of prods before Dragon woke, and his loud morning yawns almost put Minley in a panic, but they were able to get back to the hiding shelter of the forest before anyone saw them. "What were you doing by the city?" Minley asked. "You were supposed to say hidden." "I was getting the borrowed line," Dragon said. "What do you mean?" Minley said. "I have the borrowed line." And in a rush, the two of them told each other about their night adventures. Dragon stared at the ripped page from the book, and Minley looked at the red cord